this a bit delayed start. We needed to adjust the technique. And welcome to all of the people who are attending this talk online. I want to thank really the whole team of the Geneva Environmental Network, thanks to who we are able to have this Geneva Toxic Free Talks on the side of the 57th session of the Human Rights Council, where Mr. Marcos Orellana, the Special Rapporteur on the Toxics and Human Rights, presented his report. We had yesterday the opportunity to talk about the report presented to this session of the Human Rights Council, but the Special Rapporteur will be also presenting a report at the United Nations General Assembly next October on the question of gender and toxics. So we're really very happy first to have Marcos Orellana with us to talk about this report, which is already online but has not been yet presented, and that will happen in October, and have also with us a number of experts coming from the field and who will be able to share with us the experience that they are confronted with in their own situations, and also how they see, how they read this report, and what they expect from the work which is done by the special procedures and by the UN in general. So, Marcos, let me turn to you and give you the floor first. You said, and I remember when you started to initiate the process and the consultation and the preparation of your report, you said that this is really a very, very important topic. It's an issue to which you really wanted to devote some time. Why is it that you thought that the issue of gender and women as such needed such an attention, and for you to devote a report that you're presenting not to the Human Rights Council, but to the General Assembly?
Thank you, Yves, and thanks also to the Geneva Environment Network for once again this year partnering in a new edition of the Geneva Toxic Free Talks. It's my real pleasure to be a part of this conversation and this series of events. And the one we're addressing today on gender and toxics is particularly important because, as you mentioned, it touches upon the central topic that is examined in the report that I'll be presenting to the UN General Assembly in a few weeks in October in New York. What was the origin? Where is this report coming from? So early on, when I took on the mandate, you may recall that I spoke about a human rights-based approach to chemicals and wastes, and unpacking that. This approach calls for attention, certainly to individuals who suffer from the adverse impacts of exposure to hazardous chemicals and wastes. To communities, of course, but also to groups, people that may find themselves in vulnerable situations. And so you may recall that a couple of years back, I presented to the UN General Assembly a report on indigenous peoples and toxics. That report was prepared in collaboration with the movement of indigenous people, several organizations there with consultations in various regions. And it has led to recommendations that have been started to be acted upon. So I was very pleased with that. Following that line, I thought it would make a lot of sense to look at gender and toxics because of the severe impacts that women and girls especially suffer from exposure to toxics. Early on in the preparation of the report and in the partnering with feminists and other organizations working in the women's rights context, it was made clear to me by the comments received, also by the call for inputs and so forth, that the focus need not be on women and girls, but on gender as a socially constructed category. This is quite important as people may define their identity in various ways, and as people with gender diverse identities may also be adversely affected by toxics. That is also the situation of men, or some men, especially poor men, that may suffer disproportionate impacts from certain chemicals as well. These issues are explored in the report that I'll be presenting. But that said, the bulk of the analysis is on the impacts on women and girls, and especially perhaps on issues of reproductive justice. Um, so that by way of background, in terms of some of the key findings, the first point I'd like to mention is that, as I mentioned in other events and other spaces, we as humanity are facing a chemical crisis of unprecedented proportions. This is unheard of or unseen of in the history of humanity. The harm that is being inflicted on countless individuals and communities worldwide is causing its deepening injustices, and it has implications, among other things, in who can lead healthy lives and who can reproduce, who can have healthy newborns and who cannot. Uh, the resulting gender and sex related health harms from exposure to hazardous substances include infertility, miscarriage, stillbirth, premature birth or low birth weight, cancers, metabolic disorders across society. And all of this has grave implications for the enjoyment of several internationally protected human rights, like the right to health, the right to a family life, to physical and mental integrity, and certainly the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. As I mentioned, a human rights based approach compels us to look at the position, at the situation of people that may find themselves in vulnerable situations. It's not that they're vulnerable per se or because of who they are, but because of the social constructs that have placed vulnerabilities on them. And there, the focus on women and girls um, is important because women and girls are especially affected by toxic exposures, in part because of the physiology, the biological reasons, the sensitivity to certain, actually to certain chemicals that mimic hormones or endocrine disrupting chemicals, for example, but also because of social constructs in the work they do, including caregiving work. So along these lines, female reproductive systems are particularly susceptible to endocrine disrupting chemicals. Let's recall also that many of these chemicals are sourced from petrochemicals, so there is a connection there. Um, in addition to the physical manifestation of impacts, there is the emotional devastation that you can follow from infertility or stillbirth, which also unfortunately is often ignored by public health systems. Maternal exposures can also harm the fetus, and this can have lifelong health impacts on both the birthing person, the mother, other persons that may give birth, and offspring. In addition, some hazardous chemicals have transgenerational effects and thus raise sobering issues of intergenerational equity. The report also explores intersectionality, and so the situation of women and girls living in poverty, the lack of opportunities to, or lack of literacy, for example, to learn and understand about risks and take action against them. So the disempowerment, also women and girls living in sacrifice zones. So the location, the place, territory, the situation of fence line communities in industrial areas that may be experiencing intolerable levels of pollution. Also, women and girls in the workplace, the electronic sector, for example, a single electronic device can have thousands of hazardous chemicals in them, many carcinogenic, mutagenic, having reproductive impacts, and so forth. People working in the waste management sector, especially women and girls exposed in that sector to dioxins, to furans. Cleaning work, often considered a female job, so the use of cleaning products that also may be harmful. The use, so as consumers, the use of chemicals, of products that may contain hazardous chemicals, for example, mercury in skin lightening creams or menstrual products, lead and arsenic may have been found in tampons. So there's more that could be said. The report gets into the evidence that underlies the differentiated and disproportionate impacts on women and girls and others as a result of chemical exposure. So in conclusion, I do want to point out that women and girls' bodies and reproductive health are particularly vulnerable to chemical exposure, and thus there is a particular and heightened duty on governments to take differentiated measures of protection for women and girls. I look forward to presenting this report in New York in a couple of weeks, and I very much also look forward to the conversation that we're having today with a stellar panel that thank you, you've put together. Back to you, Luis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcus, for this general presentation of your report and the challenges you see directly linked to the issue of gender, as you said. Of course, a report presented to the UNGA is of very general nature, and we see the basic trends. In the field, situations appear differently because you have some highlights, some more specific issues that are stronger than others, depending on the situation where we are. And we have the privilege to have with us today representative of almost all continents. And we will be going through 3 specific situations in the field. And let me start with Victoria Maladeva. Victoria, you're coming from Siberia in Russia. And so we see this as a beautiful open space, green, healthy, and so on. Actually, you do have very, very strong chemical issues that you have to face. So the floor is yours. Thank you for being with us. And tell us what you're facing yourself on the ground and your community.
Thank you. The land of indigenous people of Russian Federations are rich in oil, natural gas, coal, iron ore, and other minerals. And for many years, mining companies have been exploiting the territories of North Siberia and the Far East of the Russian Federation in a destructive manner, damaging the environment and negatively impacting the traditional way of life of indigenous people. In Russia, Federation government no one is concerned about how intensive resource extraction has affected the indigenous people and Mother Nature. Today, about 40% of Russia's oil is extracted in Yugra, Khanty-Mansiysk Autonomous Okrug in Western Siberia. In this region, the area covered by oil spills is the size of 3 Olympic parks in Sochi. And moreover, pollution increases on average every 3 hours and 20 minutes. Oil spills contaminate the water, rivers, and kill plants and animals, and as a result, poison people. Currently, the most common type of cancer in Yugra is a breast cancer. The most vulnerable and economically disadvantaged groups, such as women and indigenous people, suffer the most from this environmental pollution and ecological disasters. Oil spills in Yugra occur due to aging pipelines. Some oil pipelines have been in operation since 1960s. For Russian oil companies, it's not profitable to fix pipelines because on average, it's cheaper for Rosneft to pay fines than to fix pipelines. My home region, Republic of Buryatia, is among the big 3 regions in Russia where uranium is mined. The Hyagdinskaya ore field is located in the Republic, and its development is carried out by the mining division of Rosatom State Corporation. And this joint stock company, Hyagda, residents of the Bantovsky Evenki district in Buryatia reported large-scale contamination of the forest area with highly toxic substances. In the remote taiga, with highly fertile land due to its volcanic past. These are ancestor lands of Evenki, who lived by hunting, fishing, and gathering. Secondly, sulfuric acid used in leaching remains in the soil to some extent and can surface primarily through groundwater into lakes, local lakes and rivers. And since the industrial development by Rosatom, Hyagda has become a state-controlled site of national importance, and no independent environmental organization has been allowed into the territory. Not a single independent study has been conducted to sample water and soil from areas near production facilities. Evenki people have demanded that independent ecologists and environmental organizations should be allowed into Rosatom's uranium facilities. All the streams and rivers carry waters to settlements like Romanovka, Bagdarin, and further north to the Muisky district and Yakutia. This polluted water enters the water intakes, homes, and is directly drunk by animals, including livestock from streams and rivers. We must demand public oversight over the activities of Hyagda in the Buantovsky district. Independent scientists and environmental organizations, as well as journalists, must be granted access to the industrial site to collect necessary samples and report on the situation to the people and the media. We ask you to support Russia's indigenous peoples in the fight for our rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria, for the presentation of your situation. Indeed, that's not the picture we usually have of Siberia, so it helps us to understand the challenges you have to face, and they're pretty big and pretty huge. Were there any specific elements, because you really gave us a very general description, you insisted on the question of breast cancer is one of the issue. You see some elements that you might have spotted from the report of the Special Rapporteur, which seems to you particularly relevant for the situation you're facing and for the struggle that you have to do?
Well, yes, as I said, breast cancer is leading, and people in general in Siberia, they don't live long. After the age of 50, now it's even 45, people die of cancer, and it's epidemic in Russian remote Siberian regions. We have current epidemic of cancer. And it's all due to, first and foremost, of course, environmental disasters, pollution of water, and all the extractive activities by Russian organizations. Government does not control anything.
Yeah, well, very sorry to hear that, and thank you for this testimony. That helps us a lot to understand the situation. Let me turn now to another continent, which is the African continent, and a pretty important country in the middle of this continent, which is Nigeria. Okan, you're coming from the Quebec Hache. Yes. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Yes.
Wow, thank you very much. And you're working with the Women Development Resource Center. You are also facing a number of very critical issues. So please, the floor is yours, and tell us the struggles that your people have to face.
Thank you very much. In the Niger Delta region of Nigeria, it has become global knowledge that we are facing critical situation of pollution as a result of destructive activities that has been going on since the 1950s. I would like to focus on the issue of oil spillage and gas flaring. Over the past 6 decades, through oil and gas extraction activities, crude oil spills into land, into water bodies, into farmlands. And when I talk about farmlands, I'm talking about communities where women are mainly subsistence farmers, though they don't hold the land titles. And when crude is spilled into those farmlands, the women are displaced from that traditional source of livelihood. But discussing compensation is with the men, particularly the chiefs, the men who own the land titles. So The spillage displaces women from their livelihood sources and also cause health challenges. When the special rapporteur was speaking, to me, he was creating a picture of the situation that we have in the Niger Delta. All the impacts on health, impacts on women, the ailments, the effects on pregnancy-related issues, fertility issues. That is what we are experiencing as a result of decades of living in a very toxic area. In 2023 alone, the National Oil Spill Detection and Response Agency in Nigeria recorded over 1,000 incidents of oil spillage. Most of these incidents of spillages are not in the media and they are not cleaned up. So the oil spilled into the land and then it stays and cakes. And when it cakes, after some time, it is still the community people that goes back to scoop it and either bury it in the earth or just keep it somewhere so that they can continue to farm. But I tell you that such lands are no longer fertile. And even other land spaces that do not experience direct spillages, the crop yields are no longer what it used to be before the impact of oil extraction. A recent study we carried out, we took soil samples, water samples, and put it through lab analysis, indicates that the area is highly polluted. This is in addition to the assessment that the United Nations Environment Programme conducted in 2008 in Ogoniland. And the report revealed that the entire Ogoniland is polluted and that both surface water and underground water contains benzene, a poisonous substance, over 900 times the permissible limit of World Health Organization. So that shows the level of toxic pollution in the Niger Delta. And what is the cause of this? Years of oil extraction, the pipelines are rust and are not replaced. Advocacy has been going on that there is need for the pipelines to be replaced. But currently, both the Nigerian government and the corporations are blaming incidents of oil spillages on the local communities because over the years, having not seen the benefit of oil extraction, possibly a part of the environmental cost, local communities are also beginning to cook the oil in a very local way, which also is poisonous to the health of the people cooking the oil and to all other community members that live within the local vicinity. So we live inside pollution. And how do you locate the entire over 30 million people in the Niger Delta? Where do you take them to? The solution is that the corporations and the government should deliberately and consciously begin the remediation of the Niger Delta region. A UNDP report indicates that between 1976 and 2001, there were over 6,000 incidents of oil spillages. Imagine the quantity of oil that has been spilled within this period into the environment and that is not cleaned up. So at times oil spilled and it is spilled in addition to previous spills and nothing is done. People stay away from the farmland and after a couple of years, they go back to farm in the same site that had experienced spillage before. It is worse when it is spilled into the river because oftentimes companies like ExxonMobil will pour chemical on top of the river. So the oil sinks to the base of the river. So even if you visit, you might not see evidence of spillage, but you will see fishing nets and boats having oil the substance. So ExxonMobil, Shell, Ajib, Chevron, Total E&P, and some other companies. That is what we experienced. December 2021, the Santa Barbara oil flow station is an offshore site, was spilling oil for 28 days into the river, non-stop. It's like the corporation did not even know what to do to stop it. The photographs we saw was that the equipment, the wellhead was spilling, and the oil was spilled into the river for 28 days. The security stopped activists and journalists from getting to the site, but there were some people who obtained permission to go close to the site to take photographs. If you Google it, you will see it. And between that December 2021 to the present day, nobody will talk of remediation, because how do you even remediate that kind of spill? It's a technical thing. I might not know how. There is another community, Owerri community in Ondo State. There is an offshore equipment that has spilled into the river and has been burning for 3 years. Nothing has been done to stop it. Possibly they don't even know how to stop it. If it is Googled, or I can send the special rapporteur a link to see the photo of that spill and also to get reports. So that is the situation that we are in the Delta. And if you begin to link that to the gender roles that women play within the household and in the community, you realize that the report of the special rapporteur that women and children are more impacted is very true, because women fish in these rivers with their canoes, not even boats, because they do it at the subsistence level. And the fish they catch is polluted. But of course, they have to feed families and they have to feed themselves. And oftentimes, women go fishing with their babies strapped on their backs in their little canoes. So the baby is also directly coming in contact with the pollution. And in a situation where there are no functional hospitals, the situation becomes critical. Over all these years and all these stories and this picture I'm trying to paint, most of the communities in the Niger Delta have no functional health facilities, no clean water to drink, and we inhale polluted air. So the situation is critical. It would be good if the special rapporteur, the UN, can influence the Nigerian government, because the federal government of Nigeria is a partner in the oil business. So the Nigerian government and the oil corporations should value people above profits and take measures to ensure that the people that live within the sites of their businesses are properly taken care of. The business should have a human rights angle to the business, so that all the years of pollution, people can recover from it. I will cite another instance before I conclude. In Bodo community in Rivers State, there was a spill, a major spill in 2008. It destroyed a whole expanse of land and also into the river. I remember once I visited the area and people were coming by boat from Bonny Town to Bodo. And then the river, it was low tide. So the boats could not get to the jetty. They had to stop midway. And then passengers from the boat had to walk to the jetty. And there were ladies in that boat. They had to walk in the river. By the time they got to the jetty, all their legs were filled with oil. It shows the level of pollution of that river. In fact, one of the ladies was weeping. This has been going on. The government is away. Some of the members of the National Assembly are from these communities. Something needs to be done. Somebody with a higher level of influence and power, like the UN, the Special Rapporteur, please have the Nigerian situation, particularly in your report, that there is need for remediation of the environment in the Niger Delta. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam, for your testimony and for all the questions you just raised. You mentioned it's really interesting because we're here at the UN, and you have mentioned a number of actions which actually have been taken by the UN in different ways. You mentioned the report from UNEP in the Ogoni regions. You mentioned also the study done by UNDP, who is there, and of course UNDP is precisely here to help for the development of the countries. So they also help to channel funds. And of course we have to mention some of the rulings which came out of the African Commission and the African Court of Human and People's Rights, who have been very clear on the legal aspects and on the responsibilities of the companies themselves. We have also here in the UN a working group on business and human rights. There's also a forum on business and human rights and so on. So we see that there is this, it's not an issue which goes without being noticed. On the other hand, your testimony shows how severe the situation still is, regardless, even though we have these different interventions. And also a clear call now for remediation, for reparation, which is really extremely strong, and we see how much it's needed. Perhaps I'll turn to you, Special Rapporteur, to have perhaps your comments. How do you see this? Because we see that the UN is not just staying on the side and looking at it and not doing anything. On the other hand, we still see that the situation remains dramatic and that there is this very strong need of reparation. What is your take on that?
Thank you, Yves, and thank you, ma'am, for such a powerful and compelling testimony. So a couple of reflections on my end. If we look back in time, and Yves, as you mentioned, the decision by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights on the situation in the region, in the Niger Delta. At the time, Ogoni land was under military repression and persecution of environmental human rights defenders. Ken Saro-Wiwa was murdered, and communities were facing the tactics of scorched earth and the denial of means of subsistence. That's also when certain international organizations became involved. Let's recall that at the time, Nigeria was ruled by military government, but as you mentioned, it appears that over the years, while there have been changes in government, the policies have remained similar, and this partnership between industrial commercial interests and governmental interests creates a culture that of political culture that perpetuates the not only the impunity but also the pressure and the contamination, and so the lack of remediation. From the perspective of the mandate on toxics and human rights, I have written to the government of Nigeria requesting the possibility for a country visit. That request has not been answered, and so I'm hoping that the Nigerian government may accept a country visit, an official request, in order to be able to should shed further lights on these issues. So that's one reflection. Another is that, as you point out, there are 30 million people that live in the area, and so in some places the idea of relocation, closing off, and declaring the site so polluted that it's uninhabitable and unfit for human life has been taken, and so the concept of sacrifice zones is an element in the narrative to illustrate those. But here, as you mentioned, it is impossible really to relocate 30 million people.
It's impossible.
And so the solution must be in closing the tap of further pollution. And we have received information on, for example, of gas flaring. So practices that instead of dealing with the hazardous wastes resulting from the exploitation of natural resources, in this case, hydrocarbons, instead of dealing with them responsibly or sustainably, they burn them. And in doing so, they spread carcinogenic, mutagenic pollutants that affect women and girls disproportionately. That practice needs to end. There's a prevention angle that needs to end. And then, of course, there's cleanup. Cleanup is expensive, it is technical, it is difficult, but it is also an imperative situation of people that every day, this is the point you made, people living with contamination every day, drinking water that's contaminated, bathing in water that's contaminated. What does that do to mental health, knowing that you're being exposed every day on end? So there needs to be concrete action now in dealing with these problems.
Yeah, thank you. And also seeing the gravity of the situation, but also the number of companies which are involved in the list that you were giving. The list we could see very clearly that most of them are not located in Nigeria. They have affiliates in Nigeria, but their headquarters are outside. So it's not an issue which is just for Nigeria alone. It definitely is an issue of international nature. And that's where it's quite interesting that you're presenting your report to the UNGA, because there is definitely now a need for a call that there is a stronger international cooperation in order to, start to put our hands on that and not just leave the different countries all alone dealing with these terrible issues.
Yeah, and there is even another angle to these companies. All of them are planning to divest. All of them are planning to sell off their assets onshore and move offshore. And they are planning to sell off their assets to a company that we don't know if they have the capacity. And the question is, are you selling off the assets and the liability? Who cleans up the mess that has already been done? Is it the company buying the assets or the people living? And there is also another twist to the story that the company to buy off the assets, African Renaissance Energy, does not even have enough capital to buy off the assets of Shell. So Shell wants to give a loan to this company to buy off their assets. So how do we explain that? Who is leaving? Who is coming in? There are a lot of questions that are not answered. So we are calling on the Nigerian government not to approve the sale of assets unless and until there is commitment to carry out remediation and there is clear agreement on who takes up the liabilities that is already on ground.
Yeah, thank you very much. And this shows really how we need to look at this issue in a global way, not by cutting it into pieces, because that does not help to try to deal with the situation. And this is why the reports at the UNGA will be quite interesting to listen to and to see how it can be followed up at that level. So thank you for doing that. So let us turn now to the third situation in another continent, which is here Sri Lanka. So Melanie Gunatilaka, okay, great, thank you. You're a strong climate activist in your country. And it's quite interesting because, of course, when we think about climate change and so on, we don't really think about Sri Lanka. That's not the first image we have in mind. So tell us, what is the situation you are facing in Sri Lanka and the activities that you're having on your side?
So Sri Lanka is one of the islands that are most threatened by climate change. We also have some of the small islands up in the north that is already under the sea level. And in terms of talking about toxic waste, we've made headlines a few times, especially considering the MV Express Pearl incident. a ship that was flagged as a Singaporean ship, registered as a Super Eco 2700 class container ship. So it was carrying over 25 metric tons of nitric acid, 87 containers of plastic pellets, among several other types of hazardous materials. And out of these, 80 of the 1,486 containers on board of the ship were flagged as containing dangerous goods. In May 2021, the ship caught fire in Sri Lankan waters, but there was quite a lot of controversies around this. The local agent was accused of deleting emails that communicated the burning of the ship as it entered into the Sri Lankan waters. And the legal cases on this also have quite a lot of controversies, given the government was pressured by the local civil society organizations to file the case within Sri Lanka, but instead they filed the case in Singapore. The analytical reports on the chemical waste that was on the ship confirms that the consequences of the spill are not just physical hazards, but they are also chemical in nature. After the incident, dead fish, turtles, dolphins, and whales washed up on local beaches alongside huge quantities of plastic pellets. Fishing bans were imposed, and there were cleanup operations happening. And there were a lot of women who were involved in these cleanup operations as well. And later, during studies, it was revealed that they had burns in their hands due to handling these toxic materials. Even though many environmental organizations raised concerns about the shipment, in March 2024, again, a widely reported accident of another Singapore-flagged cargo ship called Dali, which collided with the Baltimore Bridge. You may remember the incident. It was headed toward Sri Lanka, and it was reported that it was carrying 764 tons of hazardous waste. And with this ship accident, it was made aware that the Sri Lankan authorities were not aware of the hazardous material that was on Dali ship. So this emphasized the need for strengthening the laws on shipments and the need for transparency. In August 2021, UNEP issued a report on MV Express Pearl incident as well. And there was total, and this also, and there were, this highlights a need for stricter controls on chemical and plastic shipping. Sri Lanka has submitted a proposal to classify plastic pellets as hazardous substances, but there hasn't been a positive response as of yet. And this also highlights that the support for global plastic treaty is needed, and it needs to be legally binding, restricting shipments of microplastic among other toxic materials, and also stronger pushes to reduce plastic manufacturing, an industry which is predicted to have 4.8% of compound annual growth rate by year 2030. And another incident that I would like to highlight is waste colonialism. Between the year 2017 and 2019, a total of 263 containers of waste was imported to Sri Lanka from the UK. And this contained about 3,000 tons of waste, and it violated the Basel Convention by two companies, one Sri Lankan company called Ceylon Metal Processing Private Limited, and a UK-based company, Vanguard, a UK-registered company. And these shipments were labeled as used mattresses, carpets, and rug, but they contained hazardous bio-waste from hospitals, including body parts from mortuaries as well. And Sri Lankan civil society organizations managed to file litigations against this and turn some of these containers back to the UK, but some stayed in Sri Lanka until the litigation process stopped, process ended for quite a long time. The civil society organizations in Sri Lanka, including environmentalists and academics, have requested to ban microplastics in Sri Lanka since year 2019. They have requested in year 2019, 2021, 2022, and 2023. They suggested to give a grace period for the companies that has imported products that contain microplastics. Give a grace period for them to finish selling these products in the market. And after the grace period ends, to ensure that there are no products sold in the market that contains microplastics. But there hasn't been a positive response from the government. And I think if the United Nations Human Rights Committee can engage with Sri Lankan government to push for ban of microplastics, and also specifically on support global plastic treaty, like I mentioned earlier, to ensure that it is legally binding, and also to impose stricter controls on chemical and plastic shipping, because this is not only impacting people, but also impacts the environment in large, and specifically the women who are working in fishing industries, whose livelihoods depend on the ocean and the marine environment. And also the chemical waste in Sri Lanka runs throughout the island in terms of industrial pollutants, agricultural chemicals, and household refuse. These all have dire health consequences on women, both in rural settings and also in urban poor communities as well. And we have seen these health risks going from respiratory diseases to reproductive health issues as well. And the economic burden on this is also quite profound, given that Sri Lanka is currently going through a debt and economic crisis, which means we are prioritizing economy in all the decisions that are made. And this also poses a threat on commodification of nature, natural resources, and in addition to having green financing and funding coming in, which could pose threats of greenwashing, also false solutions. So taking all of these things into account, I think we need to pay more attention, and we definitely need stricter laws. We definitely need to strengthen the laws and regulations around shipments and also importations and altogether manufacturing of virgin plastics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melanie, for this clear description of the situation you're facing. Marcus, you said at the beginning that we are in a deep crisis of chemical nature, but also you mentioned more than once how we are involved in what is called a triple planetary environmental crisis. And we see here in this example how things are so closely connected between biodiversity, climate, and here chemical spills and so on. Actually, what is interesting is that, if I'm right, your mandate has worked on the first spill and the first ship breaking that happened in Sri Lanka, if my memory is correct.
Thanks, Ethan. Thank you, Melanie, for laying all that out. So yes, that is correct. The work on the Express Pearl has involved dialogue with organizations in Sri Lanka. But to the point that you're making about governing, regulating the transboundary transport, international trade of plastic pellets, the nurdles, that is something that I took on in the visit that I conducted to the International Maritime Organization and the visits report that I presented to the Human Rights Council. A couple of reflections on that. One is that, like other areas, here we have siloed rulemaking, and nothing that Sri Lanka does by itself would have made any difference. So it has to be at the multilateral level. It has to be an IMO-led solution. In the context of possible solutions, as my report to the visit on the IMO elaborates, there's the possibility of amending MARPOL, so one of the key instruments concerning pollution from vessels. But then again, this is cargo, and so it's not necessarily operational pollution. There's a lot of nuances, and then there's also the question of whether noodles are hazardous or not, and that could involve questions of the annexes of MARPOL as well. Some of this is also being debated in the negotiations on the Treaty on Plastic Pollution, and so we'll see how this new instrument relates to MARPOL, and then how MARPOL is able or not to address the issue of plastic pellets. It's something that I've been following quite closely in the discussion in the Marine Environment Protection Committee of the IMO, and that's to be continued. So that's one reflection. And another, on the case that you mentioned on the export of medical waste from the United Kingdom to Sri Lanka, let us recall that this mandate on toxics and human rights at the time in 1995 was created precisely to deal with the environmental injustices that arise from the dumping, especially in developing countries, from wastes and hazardous waste, especially generated in the global north. Here, almost 30 years later, we see that this practice continues. Sure, we have now the Basel Convention on transboundary movements of hazardous waste and their disposal that criminalizes illegal transfers of wastes. And yet the practice, perhaps not at the same volume that existed back in the 1980s, but there are instances of documented situation in Tunisia, for example. There's this case, there are other cases. So what this speaks of is the need for constant vigilance and monitoring, and the need then for civil society, for the United Nations agencies and programs to continue their work in monitoring and enforcement. The last footnote on this is that in the 1980s, we saw significant north-south, and this case is also north-south movement, but now we're also seeing more south-south, and the transfer of waste, a lot of plastic waste, from developing countries to even less developed countries, so even poorer countries. So the environmental injustices associated with that. Thank you for those comments and testimony.
Well, thank you to all of you. We're really reaching the end of this talk. The reference which has been made by you, Melanie, and by the Special Rapporteur to the negotiation of the plastic treaty, given the opportunity to do some announcement for the 2:30 talks that we will have today, that precisely we'll be looking at the question of how do we make sure that we have good human rights safeguards in the new plastic treaty, which is under negotiation currently. You've mentioned, Marcus, the question of a siloed approach. What is interesting is to see that one of the added value of the mandates in the Human Rights Council, which are dealing with environmental issues, your mandates, the one on climate change or the one on the right to a healthy and sustainable environment, and they're one of the few UN bodies that have this cross-cutting aspect, where you're trying to bring a general view. And we heard you talk about MARPOL, you talk about other elements. You visited MARPOL to see how do they perform. So it's interesting to see that it's one of the places where there is a possibility to have this coherent approach to issues, and to get out and step away from this very fragmented approach that the international law has up to date. I guess this is one of the challenges you will have with your reports at the UNGA, and that's one of the purpose, is to have some kind of global approach. One final sentence for the end of this talk.
Well, thank you to all the panelists for compelling testimonies. I began speaking with the brunt of the impacts of chemicals fall on women and girls, but some men are also impacted, and perhaps I should mention the example of testicular cancer as associated to exposure to PFAS, so-called forever chemicals. Also, the impacts of phthalates under endocrine disrupting chemicals in the production of semen, and that has grave implications for our ability as humans to reproduce. And what will that mean to a range of human rights, including the right to a family and others? More generally, last year we saw the conclusion of a global framework on chemicals as a successor of the strategic approach to international chemicals management. So this is the result of years of trying to see what would come after 2020. Well, with COVID, was postponed. One thing that comes out of that is that it is becoming quite clear that there are differentiated impacts of chemicals on women and girls because of biology, because of workplace, because of other social constructs. But there's inadequate differentiated data to deal with that. And so we're acting blind, as it were, when it comes to setting policy. And that is a big gap that perhaps the gender action plan that's called for as a result of the fifth session of international chemicals management from last year may take on. And the last thing I'll mention is that this report on gender and toxics, I think it does a good job at documenting impacts and identifying causes and root causes and proposing recommendations. One thing that is key is that there are many groups working in the space of reproductive health, and I feel there has been so far insufficient attention paid to the issues of chemical exposure. And so this is a call also not only on governments for differentiated policies, but also on civil society in that space to take these issues more forcefully in order to have impact in the shaping of those policies. Thank you for the space in the conversation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Special Rapporteur. Let me thank also Victoria, Emen, and Melanie for your testimonies. We're looking forward to the presentation of your reports in October at the UNGA. Thank you very much also for those who are attending the session online. We will have now, in about 5 minutes, another talk that will be looking at the issue and the impact of asbestos on Indigenous Australians. Please bear with us 5 minutes for the change and for making sure that all the technicalities work well. Many thanks once again to all of you for your very, very valuable testimony. All the best, and please, all our support for the struggles that you're having.
And at 2:30, there's also the discussion on the plastics treaty.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.